Drove 4 hours to surprise my grandmother on her 50th wedding anniversary, and when I turned onto her street, my uncle's truck was already there, backed up close to the side door the way you park when you're loading something, not visiting. My name is Laurel. I'm 32 years old. I work as a property compliance officer for the City of Toronto, which means I spend my days reading the fine print that developers and landlords hope no one ever reads. I know how title works. I know how title works. I know how the gap between what people say they're doing and what they're actually doing tends to look on paper. I did not come to this work by accident, and that matters to what happened next. My grandmother, I call her Nan, has lived in the same house in Prince Edward County for 43 years. It's a century home, white clapboard, big wraparound porch, a wood stove in the kitchen that she's never once replaced with anything modern. She and my grandfather bought it the year they got married. He passed 8 years ago from a series of small strokes that took him slowly, the way the worst losses tend to go. After he died, Nan kept the house exactly as it was. Not out of grief, she told me once, but because she'd earned the right to live exactly as she pleased. The house had needed work for years. The porch boards were soft in 3 places. The windows hadn't been updated since the 90s, and the heating bills in February were brutal. The upstairs bathroom had a tub that my grandmother, who is 74 and has mild arthritis in both hips, could not safely use anymore. I noticed all of this over the course of several visits and said nothing, because Nan was not someone who welcomed commentary on how she managed her home. But I kept a list. When I turned 31, I had paid off my student loans, put 6 months of expenses into savings, and had a little left over. Not a lot. Enough. I called a contractor I'd worked with professionally on a heritage renovation file, someone whose crew understood older construction, who didn't cut corners and didn't talk down to clients. I told him what I wanted to do and asked him to price it honestly. The scope came in at $280,000. Porch reconstruction, window replacement throughout, a full bathroom renovation on the main floor with a walk-in shower and grab bars fitted to look like fixtures, not medical equipment. A new furnace. New insulation in the attic. Refinished floors. I had $140,000 in savings and investments. I took out a personal loan for the rest. I did not tell anyone. Not my mother, not my aunt who lives in Ottawa, and especially not my Uncle Brendan. My Uncle Brendan is my grandfather's younger brother. He's 61, retired early from a career in sales, and has spent most of the last decade finding reasons to be involved in things that aren't his. He has a wife. I'll call her by her name because she earned it. Sandra. Sandra is the kind of person who asks about your finances with a smile and files the answer away. I grew up watching both of them calculate. It's a particular skill, the way some people can walk into a room and immediately begin assessing what could be extracted from it. I was 12 before I understood that not everyone did that. I was 20 before I stopped being surprised that adults could be that way about family. I arranged the renovation to happen while Nan spent 6 weeks in the summer at her sister's place in Nova Scotia. I drove her to the airport myself, told her I had some minor repairs organized for while she was away, and did not elaborate. She looked at me for a moment with the expression she uses when she suspects she's not getting the full story. Then she kissed my cheek and went through security. The contractor and I worked through a timeline I'd mapped out in detail. I drove out from Toronto on weekends to check progress. The porch came first, then the windows, then the bathroom, then the furnace, and finally the floors. The last crew finished 2 days before Nan flew home. Before any of this started, I had spoken to a lawyer, a real estate and estate planning lawyer in Belleville, someone I found through a professional referral and paid out of pocket. We set up a trust. The house had always been in Nan's name alone, which I was grateful for. We kept it that way, but structured it so that the property could not be sold, leased, or materially encumbered without the written consent of the trustee. The trustee was me. We recorded everything with Hastings County. The legal fees were another $4,000, which I paid and did not mention to anyone. I picked Nan up from the airport and drove her home with the radio on. When we turned down her street and she saw the porch lit up with the string lights the contractor had suggested, and the new windows gleaming, and the front door repainted in the dark green she'd always said she wanted, she went very quiet. She asked me to stop the car at the end of the driveway. She sat there for a moment, just looking. Then she said, "You didn't have to do this." And I said, "I know." She took my hand and held it for a moment without saying anything else. That was none. She doesn't make speeches, but I felt it. We spent that first weekend cooking together and sitting on the porch in the evening. The new porch boards didn't creak. The kitchen was warm in a way it hadn't been in years, and she noticed that first. Before the windows, before the bathroom, she noticed that the house held heat differently. She went through every room slowly, the way you do when something has changed and you're still learning to trust it. On Sunday, she tried the new shower and came downstairs and said simply, "This is very good, Laurel." From her, that was an aria. I drove back to Toronto on Sunday evening feeling something I don't have a clean word for. Settled, maybe, like a debt I'd been carrying, not a financial one, a quieter one, had been paid in the right currency. I should have anticipated what came next. I knew Nan. I knew she couldn't hold happiness inside herself when she was truly feeling it. She called her sister that same night to describe the bathroom tile in detail. And 4 days later, my mother told me that Brendan had called to ask for the address because Nan had mentioned the renovation and he wanted to come see it. My mother passed this along in the neutral tone she uses when she's relaying information she's uncomfortable with. That tone was its own kind of message. I couldn't get away that weekend. I had a compliance audit with a tight deadline and a formal response due to the ministry on a heritage file that had been mishandled before I inherited it. I told myself Brendan was family and probably just curious. I told myself the legal structure was clean and airtight. I was right about the structure. I was wrong about Brendan. The voicemail came on a Monday morning while I was in a review meeting. I saw the notification on my phone and excused myself to the hallway. Nan's voice was careful in the way it gets when she is trying not to alarm anyone. The same voice she used when she told me my grandfather's condition had worsened. The same measured tone that means, "I need you, but I don't want to frighten you." She said, "Brendan and Sandra have been here twice this week. They had someone with them the second time, a man I didn't recognize, and Brendan introduced him as someone who helps people manage their assets. There's a folder on the kitchen table I don't understand." I told them nothing has been signed, and I want to speak to you first. I want you here, Laurel, whenever you can. I was in my car within 40 minutes. I knew something had shifted before I reached the house. Brendan's truck was in the driveway, parked sideways like he owned the place. Sanders' SUV was behind it. There was a third vehicle I didn't recognize. A silver sedan with a magnetic realtor's sign on the door that someone had clearly just stuck there and not bothered to straighten. I sat in my car for a moment and looked at it. Then I got out and took my work bag from the back seat. I had brought the full file. Inside, my grandmother was standing at the kitchen window with a mug of tea she hadn't drunk. Brendan was at the table with a man in a blazer I didn't know. Sandra was in the sitting room making a careful study of the built-in shelves, running her hand along the wood the way people do when they're pricing things. Brendan looked up. He said, "Oh, good. You're here. We were hoping to catch you." The warmth in his voice was the kind that has been assembled rather than felt. I'd watched him use it my whole life. I said, "What's in that folder?" He had told me. The man in the blazer was a realtor with a brokerage out of Kingston. Brendan had been researching short-term vacation rental income in Prince Edward County, which, since the wineries and the sandbanks had become destinations, had become extremely lucrative. Conservative projections for a property like Nan's, he said, were $40,000 to $55,000 per season. There was a management company that would handle everything. Nan would be welcome whenever the property wasn't booked. The listing could be live within 2 weeks. He said it like he was doing us a favor. I looked at the realtor. He gave me a professionally neutral smile and said nothing. Sandra had drifted in from the sitting room and was now leaning in the doorway with the expression she uses to suggest she's not involved in whatever is happening but would like to know how it ends. My grandmother put her mug on the counter. She said, "I didn't agree to anything." Her voice was quiet and very clear. Brendan said, "Nan, we're just presenting options." He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Not enough." I set my bag on the table, unzipped it, and took out the file. I placed the first document down, the title to the property, with the trust notation recorded at the Hastings County Registry office 7 months earlier. I read the relevant clause out loud. The trust instrument held the property for Nan's exclusive, unconditional, and lifetime use. No provision for subletting, short-term rental, or commercial use of any kind without written consent from the trustee. "And you're the trustee," Sandra said. Her voice had gone flat. "I am." I looked at her. "My obligation is to ensure the property is used according to its terms. Those terms exist to protect her." Brendan leaned back. He said, "Trust instruments can be challenged, especially when circumstances change." I placed a second document on the table, a written legal opinion from the estate lawyer in Belleville confirming the structure was valid, properly recorded, and not challengeable by non-beneficiaries. The opinion was dated and signed and had the lawyer's Law Society registration number on the letterhead. "Non-beneficiaries," I said, "means everyone in this room except her." The kitchen was quiet in the way kitchens go quiet when something important has just been said and no one is certain yet what to do with it. I placed the third document down, a printout from a popular vacation rental platform showing a draft listing, property photos taken from Nan's front porch, the wraparound porch clearly visible, the interior shot of the new bathroom that had been taken without Nan's knowledge or consent. The listing account was registered to an email address associated with Brendan's name. I had found it 40 minutes before I left Toronto. I had already submitted a report to the platform's trust and safety team citing misrepresentation of ownership and unauthorized use of property photos. I told him this. The realtor picked up his folder and stood. The fourth document was the Prince Edward County Municipal Bylaw governing short-term rentals. As of the previous year's amendment, all short-term rental operations in the county required a municipal license, a property inspection, and annual renewal. No application had been filed for this address. Fines for unlicensed operation ran up to $10,000 per occurrence. And finally, I placed a letter on the table. It was addressed to Brendan and Sandra jointly. It had been prepared by my lawyer. It was a formal cease and desist, notifying them that any further attempt to list, photograph, market, or misrepresent the property or to approach my grandmother with proposals relating to its commercial use would be treated as tortious interference with the trust, and that I would pursue all available remedies. Brennan stared at the documents. He looked up at me and said, "We're family." I said, "Yes, and right now you're guests in her home who have overstayed. I'm asking you to leave." What followed was not graceful. Brendan made a call in the driveway, his voice carrying to the kitchen window. Sandra said something to my grandmother on the way out that I didn't fully hear, but that made Nan's jaw tighten. The realtor left quickly and without ceremony. Their vehicles were gone within 20 minutes. Nan made tea. We sat at the table in the quiet of the house, and I felt the hum of the new furnace doing its job somewhere underneath us. After a while, she said, "The second time they came, Sandra asked me what I planned to do with the property eventually." I thought she was being thoughtful. She wrapped her hands around her mug. "I should have called you that day." I told her she hadn't done anything wrong. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Your grandfather would have handled this very badly. He would have shouted and then felt terrible about it and then avoided the whole thing for 6 months. She almost smiled. "You handle it differently." I told her I'd learned from watching what happened when things weren't handled properly. 3 days after they left, Brendan posted something on Facebook. He didn't name anyone, but it was clearly about us. Something vague and wounded about how sometimes when you try to help a family member, you get treated like a criminal, and how it's a shame when younger generations think they know better than everyone else. His sister, who lives in Calgary and had no context for any of this, commented with a string of heart emojis. Two of Nan's friends from her garden club sent her messages asking if everything was all right. I wrote a single response, an email to Brendan and Sandra with a copy to my lawyer, stating that any further public commentary referencing me, my grandmother, or the property, whether by name or by implication, would be addressed as defamation where materially false, and as torious interference where it caused demonstrable harm to any interest protected under the trust. All further communication was to go through my office. The posts were deleted by the following morning. 6 weeks later, a man I didn't recognize rang Nan's doorbell on the Thursday afternoon. She called me from the front hallway while he was still standing on the porch. He had a folder. He said Brendan had sent him, that he was there to discuss the property. I had installed a security camera during the renovation. It fed to an app on my work phone, motion activated with a 12-hour archive. I pulled it up at my desk in Toronto while she was still on the phone with me. I told her to go inside and lock the front door. I took a screenshot from the camera feed, clearly showing his face and the folder in his hand, and texted it to Brendan with one line, "I am watching this in real time. The trust is on file with the county. I suggest your contact leave before I call the Belleville OPP detachment." Then I called Nan back and stayed on the phone with her. His reply came in 4 minutes. "Wrong house. Sorry, his mistake." The man was gone before I finished the call. That weekend, I drove out to the county. I brought a locksmith and we replaced all the exterior deadbolts with electronic keypad locks. I set the code myself and wrote it in large, clear numbers in the front of the household binder Nan keeps in the kitchen drawer, the one with the plumber's number and the furnace manual and the winter shutoff instructions. We tested it 3 times together until she had it in muscle memory, and I showed her how to change the code if she ever wanted to. She stood beside me in the doorway while I walked her through it, and when we were done, she said, "You know what I've been thinking about?" I asked what. She said, "I've been thinking about the fact that I almost let them talk me into it. They came in so certain, and I started to feel like maybe I was being unreasonable, like it was my job to find a way to be agreeable." She looked out at the porch. 50 years I've lived that way. Find a way to be agreeable. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't want to do that anymore." I told her she didn't have to. She nodded once, like the matter was settled, and went inside to start dinner. Brennan hasn't contacted her directly since. He sent me an email about a month after everything that had the subject line clearing the air, 2 sentences about how things had gotten out of hand, and a suggestion that we find a time to talk. I read it, moved it to a folder, and haven't replied. I'm not holding the door closed. I'm just not standing at it waiting for someone who showed me exactly who he was. What I've understood since is something I spent a long time being confused about. I thought protecting someone was the same as being protective, that it meant absorbing difficulty quietly, never naming the limit, never letting anyone see the mechanism. What I know now is that the mechanism is the point. The trust is recorded with the county. The camera feeds to my phone. The cease and desist is in a folder on my lawyer's server. None of that is hostile. All of it is simply the difference between hoping nothing goes wrong and making sure it can't. Nan called me last Tuesday, no particular reason. She'd been out in the garden and found the first crocuses coming up along the porch foundation. She said the new boards didn't have that soft spot anymore, and she'd been walking out there every morning. She said the house felt like itself again. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. Some things you do because you can see what someone has earned, and you want to make it real for them. You want to build something that holds. And when someone tries to take it apart, you find out pretty quickly whether you built it right. I built it right. There's a moment I keep coming back to, not the confrontation at the kitchen table, not the documents going down one by one, but the moment Nan stood at the end of her own driveway and looked at what the house had become. She didn't rush in. She just sat there, taking it in, like she needed to be sure it was real before she let herself feel it. That image stays with me because it's the clearest picture I have of what the whole thing was actually about. Not the money, not the legal structure, not any of it. Just her, sitting still, allowing herself to have something good. What happened with Brendan and Sandra was a direct result of choices, theirs and mine. They walked into that house believing the renovation had created something they could redirect toward their own benefit. That belief didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of watching people in this family absorb without pushing back, agree without meaning it, stay quiet to keep the peace. I had done that too for a long time. It's easy to mistake that kind of silence for generosity. It isn't. It's just postponed difficulty, and the interest compounds. The choices I made, the trust, the legal opinion, the camera, the cease and desist already drafted before I left Toronto, those weren't acts of suspicion. They were acts of clarity. I knew what I was walking into because I had paid attention for years. I had watched how Brendan moved through family situations, what he prioritized, how Sandra positioned herself whenever resources were being discussed. Paying that kind of attention is its own form of care. It's choosing to see people as they are rather than as you wish they were, and then deciding what to do with that information. That's not cynicism, that's how you actually protect the people who matter to you. What I want to say to anyone who recognizes the situation, who has done something quietly good and then watched someone else try to claim it, is this: the structure you build around what you love is not a sign of distrust. It's a sign of seriousness. Brendan called me family right before I asked him to leave, and he meant it as a deflection, as though the word alone should have overridden everything I'd seen him do. But family is not a pass. It's a relationship that works when everyone in it acts with some basic decency toward the others and stops working the moment one person decides the rules apply to everyone except themselves. Nan told me she'd spent 50 years finding ways to be agreeable. I think about that a lot. The intelligence to see what's happening, the integrity to name it honestly, and the resolve to follow through even when following through is uncomfortable. Those three things together are what kept that house intact. Not any single one of them. All three, at once, in the right order. She calls me on Tuesdays sometimes. No particular reason. Last week, she said the crocuses were back along the porch foundation and the board still didn't creak. That's enough. That's exactly enough.